Welcome back to Political Perspectives. I'm Hugo Gurdon, Editor-in-Chief of the Washington Examiner, and we're going to talk about the campaign, and to do that I want to bring in Byron York, Chief Political Correspondent. And Byron, we finally arrived after Kamala Harris displaced President Joe Biden more than a month ago as the leader of the party, or at least as the nominee, with her agreement to do an interview. Now, there was a while where running for the presidency but running away from interviews seemed to work, and she seemed to sort of skate along. But hasn't it become sort of a bit weird, the length of time, that the care and the fuss that's being taken on the Democratic side to make sure that she gets the interview that she wants with the person she wants, and it's going to be on CNN? Hasn't it become a kind of a token of the party's lack of confidence in her as a sort of leader and as saying what she actually believes in?
Yeah, I think that they were seeing that she was having a great honeymoon after her sort of instant ascension to the nomination, and she was getting extremely favorable press coverage. All of this without an interview. So they think, well, why do an interview? And by the way, why are we talking about one interview? Normally, a candidate does a lot of interviews, and they do, more importantly, in my opinion, press conferences with a lot of journalists there who are asking questions. They do general gaggles or interactions with their traveling press on a daily basis. Instead, she's done nothing. And there's been this big buildup. She said she'd do it by the end of the month. I mean, you've turned this, what should be a routine interview, into the Super Bowl. And it's just a bizarre situation. And I agree. I think the reason she was not doing the interviews was for a couple of reasons. One, as you suggested, she's really not a very good extemporaneous speaker. And to do an interview would just be to give herself lots of opportunities to make problems for herself. But the other reason was the press was doing her work for her. One of the themes of this campaign is that she's, quote, moving toward the center. Well, she hadn't said anything that indicates to me she's moving toward the center, but a lot of her anonymous aides have leaked to the press that she no longer holds this or that position that she held when she ran in the progressive lane of the Democratic primary in 2019. So when you have the press doing your work for you, telling the voters that you've moved toward the center based on anonymous aides and not on anything that you've said, I mean, there really wasn't a reason to do an interview, certainly before now.
Right. There's a deception involved in this, obviously. It is, as you say, anonymous aides who are putting it out that she no longer stands for this or that she has previously espoused, and she hasn't said it herself. This is trying to have it both ways, isn't it? So that in public, it can be, there's a kind of somewhat plausible deniability about her embrace of far left-wing policies. But in smaller theaters, smaller audiences, and in other ways, she is making sure that she has not abandoned the positions that she has held in the past. So there is a sort of central deception here, I think, in the campaign. And in the interview that she's going to do with Dana Bash on CNN, she's also taking along Tim Walz, her vice presidential pick, as a kind of security blanket. This doesn't suggest confidence either, does it?
Yeah. Actually, the first thing you said, it's kind of like our Taiwan policy. It's strategic ambiguity.
Right.
So she doesn't really say what she believes in. And I thought it was a little odd that it's going to be a joint interview. Now, I will say, whatever reason that Harris is doing it as a joint interview, the interviewer, Dana Bash of CNN, is perfectly free to mostly ignore Tim Walz and direct her questions to Kamala Harris, who is, after all, the one who's running for president. Right. So a lot depends on the interviewer. And I believe I had originally thought, well, maybe this will be live. That would be kind of interesting, but I don't think it's going to be. I think it'll be taped. And, I think he'll see some sort of challenging questions, but my guess is you won't see the sort of real free-for-all that you might had there been maybe a more centrist interviewer.
Right. And so, Byron, what are some of the questions that you would like to see her obliged to answer? And I suppose any questions that you think Tim Walz should be obliged to answer. What would you like to see, questions would you like to see posed?
I would try to establish, I mean, just look at the biggest issues of the campaign. Inflation and the economy, immigration, and abortion, I think, are in most polls the top three issues. Now, she's made herself very, very clear on abortion. She thinks that's a real winning issue for Democrats, and it might be. But anyway, she's very, very clear on it. As far as the economy is concerned, I mean, she's come out and been in favor of price controls, which her aides tried to walk back after she talked about it. On immigration, in 2019, she was in favor of decriminalizing illegal border crossings and allowing people who cross illegally into the United States to stay in the United States, and to throw out Donald Trump's Remain in Mexico program, which was probably the one single policy that did the most to reduce the flow of illegal crossings at the border. So what does she think about that? Obviously, energy is a big thing, the whole fracking thing. She's apparently changed her view. She wanted to eliminate it in 2019, and now it's okay. And also, I would look for things like the administration's policy, trans policy on gender-affirming care. I mean, the Biden administration has been way out there on an issue about this, and we're seeing in Europe and in the United States some people having real second thoughts about hormone treatments, puberty blockers, and certainly surgery, all for minor children. I mean, it's an insane policy, and yet it is the policy of the Biden-Harris administration.
Right.
So there's a lot to ask her. And then with Walz, obviously he was governor during the riots in Minneapolis, and let's say he did not really act quickly to stop the riots. And by the way, Kamala Harris actually raised money for people who were arrested in the riots. So I think the riots and the COVID lockdowns for Walz would be another issue to talk about.
Yeah, it's going to be actually a real test for CNN. Now, CNN, including Dana Bash, and were actually acquitted themselves very well. It was generally agreed in the debate, which between Donald Trump and the President Biden. But this is going to be another test to see if they are willing to hold Kamala Harris's and Tim Walz's feet to the fire, or at least persist in questions to which voters really have a right to an answer. But let's turn our attention, Byron, to Kamala Harris's opponent, to Donald Trump. There's been news from the special counsel, Jack Smith, who has come out with, I think it's called a superseding indictment.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about what's in that, and also about the extraordinary timing in that this comes about 3 weeks before people start to vote.
Yeah, this is a new version of the indictment that Smith filed last year against Trump. It's the case against Trump regarding the 2020 election on January 6th. So that's different from the classified documents case against Trump. Same prosecutor, but that's in Florida. So anyway, this is a 2020 case. And the reason Smith had to go back and rework the indictment was the Supreme Court decision that said that the president does actually have some areas of immunity. For example, when he is discussing things, the president is discussing things with his attorney general and top officials of his Justice Department, that sort of thing, what they discuss is basically they're immune from prosecution for that. So what Smith had done, he had made Jeffrey Clark, who was a top-ranking official in the Trump Justice Department, who had at the time wanted to send a letter to the legislature in Georgia and some other states saying that there were significant irregularities in the election, and that the Justice Department recommended that the legislature there, take another look at this. And Smith had made that. Well, first of all, Fani Willis in Georgia indicted Clark for it. And Smith had made Clark an unindicted co-conspirator because he had made that whole Justice Department thing a big episode in his indictment. Well, Well, now we find out from the Supreme Court that, Trump is immune from that, and that immunity covers Jeffrey Clark too. So Smith had to go in and take Jeffrey Clark and everything about Jeffrey Clark out of the indictment. And he had to do that in a few other ways too, to comport with the Supreme Court ruling. Now, the timing of it is interesting because it came out on Tuesday, 24 days before the start of early voting in some states like Virginia, which starts on the 20th of September. So you ask yourself, the Justice Department used to have what was called a rule. Maybe it wasn't a rule, it wasn't written down. It was either the 60-day rule or the 90-day rule, depending on who you talk to. But it said that that prosecutors should not, charge a case or take any big significant action like filing a new indictment within 60 days of an election. And this seemed to be pretty obvious. It actually stems from an actual Justice Department guideline, which says that prosecutors cannot make any decision on the basis of influencing an election. So you saw in the Washington Post yesterday that if it was a 60-day rule, that Smith made it with 10 days to spare. There were 70 days left until the election, so it's okay. He's not going to run afoul of that. And then a number of people, including me, pointed out that, the old 60-day rule is based on the idea of there being an election day when everybody votes. And we all know that that's just not the way it is now. And early voting, as I said, in Virginia and some other states starts on the 20th of September. So it looks like he didn't make the 60-day rule. He didn't make the 50 or the 40 or even the 30-day rule because it's 24 days. Right. So Trump is going to complain a lot about it. Nothing's going to happen because this rule isn't written down and certainly not enforceable. But it's kind of fishy.
It's fishy. Donald Trump will obviously talk about it a lot, but so will Kamala Harris and the rest of the Democrats, because that's what these prosecutions are largely for, is it not? They are. Yes. They are to give the Democratic candidate or candidates and their surrogates a club with which to beat their political opponents and to talk about this all the way through the election. It's a pretty dark stain on our democratic process, isn't it?
I think it is. And I mean, this case especially was a favorite of many of the anti-Trump types, resistance types, never-Trumpers, because it did involve the election. If you listen to Kamala Harris, she has actually she has made the lawfare against Trump a central feature of her campaign speech in this way. She says that when she was a prosecutor, she dealt with sexual abusers, and she dealt with fraudsters, and she dealt with people who engaged in illegal business practices for themselves. And so then the punchline is, so believe me, I know how Donald Trump operates. Ha, ha, ha. Yeah. And she's actually referring to the cases against Trump that have already been adjudicated. The sexual abuse thing was the E. Jean Carroll lawsuit against Trump, in which he was found liable for sexual abuse, a case that I personally thought should never, ever have been brought. And then the other case, the fraud, was the lawsuit against Trump from the Attorney General of New York, Letitia James, which has already been adjudicated. And then the last thing was the criminal charges, the Alvin Bragg criminal charges. So she's actually being somewhat cautious in that she's basically referring to the cases against Trump that have already been decided, and she can declare Trump guilty of this or that.
Right. But it's a pretty unedifying sight, though, and a tactic which I think that people would not have thought a generation ago could possibly come into presidential elections here. So, Byron, that's where we're going to leave it for this week. We'll be back again next week. Thanks very much for joining us on Political Perspectives, and thank you all for joining us on Political Perspectives. Join us again next time.